to the Startups of London podcast. I'm your host, Ozzy, and we have a travel startup today. tripAbrood, described as an AI travel assistant, matching you to your perfect family holiday. I'm joined by the CEO and co-founder, Alexa-Maria Rathbone Barker, who used to be a senior executive at Bloomberg before the startup plunge. So I think this is going to be a very interesting conversation. My first question, Alexa, is how would you describe what your AI does without using the word AI?
That's a great question. Well, first of all, thanks a lot for having me on the podcast. It's a real pleasure to be here. So what we're trying to create at tripAbrood is the kind of experience you get when you speak to a real human travel consultant that has a real specialist lens in family travel. Because let's face it, when you're booking a holiday for your family, there are complexities and challenges that just don't exist when you're booking a holiday as a couple or as a single traveller. So we're trying to really create a digital version of a human travel consultant that is the most specialised family travel agent that you could imagine.
How does it work? A lot of the audience we have is are tech-savvy people interested in have from machine learning to how neural networks work. So I wouldn't mind hearing a bit more about the tech side of things. How does your AI actually work? Is it kind of like a chatbot? Are you training a model? Are you using a language model that exists already, like the GPT-3?
No, I'd love to answer that question. So our AI is called Sky, just to give her a bit of a name, if not a face.
Cool name.
And the way that our AI works is that Sky is a chatbot experience, so a conversational interface. And our family customers come in, our parents come in and speak to Sky in a sort of conversational dialogue form. And we have spent over 12 months analysing how parents currently think when they are booking. In our case, we're focusing on holiday accommodation initially, so when they're booking that perfect place to stay. And we've gone through several iterations of Sky. She started off in Facebook Messenger as a chatbot, sort of plug-in at Facebook. And we had around a 23% completion. So 23% of people coming in, finishing the conversation with Sky.
That's good.
But then there was a human agent at the end who then spent obviously time going through and trawling through the lists of options. And what we found is actually by the time we came back with the option, the customer had invariably probably found the accommodation online and had gone ahead and booked it. So we knew, look, there's value in that conversation because we were getting some great NPS scores and great feedback from customers, but we obviously need to automate that human side that then goes and searches for the right hotel. And we also wanted to increase our completion rate from 23 to something much higher. So we set ourselves a goal of, could we get near to 80% completion? That means that 80% of conversations were finishing that started. And to do that, we brought the chatbot into a website experience. So mobile optimized website. We connect to Google Dialogflow, who powers Sky. And what that enabled us to do was really kind of control that user experience and what it feels like and how Sky acts. And over the last 12 months, our completion rate has gone up to the target of 80%. So we now have 80% people finishing the conversation. And that's been a lot of hard work around recreating a intuitive thought process for a parent as they think about what questions they tend to ask themselves when they're researching. And then we've created a matching engine that connects into over 600,000 properties all over the world and takes all the inputs from Sky and matches the user to the top 6 accommodation options for their family needs in seconds.
That's incredible. I'll get back to the business in a second, but I'm very curious about your take on what it is like to work in a startup versus a large organization, because you have a very interesting history, having worked in Bloomberg and before that Procter & Gamble for more than 12 years. And then for the last three years and 3 months, you're the CEO and co-founder of tripAbrood. So what is it? What is different working in a startup versus a large organization? What surprised you?
Yeah, well, I think it's like chalk and cheese, isn't it? Because from a corporate perspective, I've worked my way up the organization, that I've worked in, and had amazing opportunities, and such a privilege to work in different parts of the world, to manage divisions of sort of north of 300 people, and yes, I've been able to achieve things within those roles where I wouldn't have been promoted into them, but you're still very much reporting to other people further up the chain, and the goal is to maximize the profit for the company, and to ensure that you are delivering as an organization to the expectations that you've set on yourself or you've been set. And I think when it's a blank canvas and basically you are there and you're there's no one above you, there's no one to tell you what to do, or that you need to tell what you're doing. Really, obviously I have a board and now I'm accountable to them, but from a day-to-day management of the business, it's sort of like the buck stops with you. I think the biggest difference for me is the amount of thinking I have to do, problem solving, collaboratively, but also by myself as a leader. And there aren't precedents, whereas in a corporate organization you can often refer to, well, when we sold at this sort of level before, or when we launched this new product, or when we entered this new market, this is what happened. When you're creating something that doesn't exist, the idea of having a precedent is obviously non-existent, and therefore you have to start asking yourselves the really tough questions. And probably the second thing I'd say is that level of self-criticism, whereby you can really hone in and say, I don't think I made the right decision there, or I don't think we did the best job there. I think we did brilliantly here, but I think we could have done better there. And again, being able to have the freedom, which is the wonderful freedom of starting a business, of being able to say, you know what, it doesn't matter if I do these things wrong. Essentially, no one's done it right before because it's not been built before. So let's not worry about, is this the best way to do things or the worst way to do things? Let's just think about what problem we're trying to solve. And what do we think are the best ways to solve that problem, by speaking to customers and focusing on the customer problem.
It's usually the path less traveled, the world of startups. And it's also a world of preconceived ideas, people watching the success stories of these Silicon Valley giants. And one of those very interesting conversations usually takes place about the pace of building a startup usually. So when I built my first business, I thought I would be where the business was in 3 years, in one year. So it was 300% slower than I wished it would be. So I'm seeing tripAbrood active for 3.3 years and 3 months. Have you experienced something similar, and what were the different phases in the business, if so?
Yeah, no, that's great. It's a great point. I think as entrepreneurs, we tend to be very optimistic people. I think you have to be, if you're thinking that you can create something that hasn't been done before. You have to be bullish on your own abilities and bullish on the idea. And I think that definitely played out for me. I think I went into each fundraise with the idea that I was going to raise millions and millions of pounds. And then the reality of fundraising and the challenges of getting a business off the ground sort of hit home. And then it becomes more about, well, actually, how much money do I need? And then where do I source that money from? And who are the best investors for my business? And I think that I certainly learned a lot of lessons around being pragmatic, especially at the early stage, and thinking, you know what, this isn't necessarily about who raises the most money. Some of the most successful businesses, you look at Airbnb and other businesses, they started like we all start, with small seed rounds. And then they focused on building a business and getting traction points, and then look at where they are now. I think I learned the hard way by putting probably too much expectation on myself, and then being disappointed with myself when the inevitable reality of, well, I'm not going to give you millions of pounds because you don't have a product and you don't have validation. Apart from that, obviously we've managed to raise money. We've raised 2 rounds so far, a pre-seed and a seed, and we raised just shy of £1 million in total. So we've done well. But I definitely had, when I started this, thoughts that in 3 years' time I'd sort of be IPOing on a stock exchange, which hasn't quite happened yet, but hopefully not too far away.
Hopefully. One of the most interesting statistics I read ever on startups in the last few years was that the average age and tenure of the stereotypical startup entrepreneur has been increasing steadily. And I think that trend is actually very positive because I've worked about 8 years in larger organizations, international organizations. And for the last 6 years now, I'm an entrepreneur. And I cannot speak enough about the skills that I've gained working in large organizations, be it time management, managing conversations with different people, prioritization, multitasking. So a lot of important professional skills there. And on top of that, you also get to be a part of a bigger network. And I think these pay off when you're raising a fund or when you're building the business. Have you experienced that? The assets that you built working in Bloomberg and other companies, did they come in handy when you built the first startup? How would you think it would have been if you were just out of the uni and starting your startup? How do you think things would have been different?
Yeah, well, I mean, I've come to building a startup post having 3 kids. So, I've got 3 young kids. I'm sort of at that lifestyle. I'm on the other side sometimes of when people often start businesses.
Yeah.
I do think that comes with its advantages, as you said, because I come into starting tripAbrood with an existing network and existing frame of credibility. And I think that's certainly helped. If I look back at moments, there's a board member that was an old client of mine through Bloomberg that is now on my board. I was introduced to the lead investor at the seed round through a Techstars and Barclays program that I had the privilege of going on. And I knew someone through Bloomberg Days that was running that program. There are lots of connections that then help to give you opportunities to get through doors. And, it's not necessarily that those people are biasing those relationships. It's just that when you go into a room and someone remembers, oh, I remember you. And I already have a level of respect for you because I've seen you in action before. I think that becomes really, really powerful when you go into these fundraising scenarios and it's not a completely cold introduction.
Indeed. When I study the success stories of startups, and I've been doing that for a while now, or individuals, I'm most focused on their first big win. Because once you have had a certain amount of capital, a certain type of an exit, or a big commercial success, then you're playing a different game in a way. So you have a competitive advantage. But that first big win, as that's, I think, was most crucial. So if you take a retrospective look at tripAbrood and the last 3 years and 3 months, what was the first big commercial win for the business?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'll give 2 examples of a win because I think people and commercial relationships always go hand in hand. So, from the people side, I think the first big win for me really was getting that first round of funding under my belt from existing network. But there were 2 key investors that came into that round that were really pivotal to the beginning successes of the company. One was Vic Wallier, who was the global head of marketing for Expedia Group, and the other one was Charles Petruccelli, who was the former global head of travel for Amex. And Charles is the chair of our board. And I think that was a really pivotal moment when they both came on board and Charles then became chair to really add that layer of credibility to the business and also give me such a wealth of experience within the travel and management industry to be able to leverage off. So that then in turn probably helped in many ways to establish the biggest commercial win we had, which was to go into partnership with and that's going to sound very cryptic. I'm not able to publicly say exactly the company that I'm talking about, but one of the biggest firms in globally. They select a startup a year to partner with, and we were selected as that startup at the end of last year. And so we now have connected into them, and that gives us connectivity, as I said, to 600,000 properties in over 700,000 destinations all over the world.
Incredible. That's a big win.
Yeah, massive win for us. Yeah.
Massive. Yeah. That was very insightful. Thank you very much for both of those answers. Segueing to a different part of, I think, working in a startup, perhaps the best, perhaps the worst. You will make mistakes if you're an entrepreneur because it's a path that's not been used a lot before. So there are a lot of new grounds to break, new problems to solve, and most of the time we make mistakes and we learn from the mistakes. So I always, and this is also a concept Ray Dalio obsessively talks about, these feedback loops of going back to the mistakes, and he builds his 7 life principles around those mistakes. I actually have a notebook in which I sometimes note down the mistakes I've made, and I have a red loop, almost like a circle. Okay, what have I learned from this mistake, and how does it actually direct my life in the future? So these learning loops are, I think, incredibly valuable. They're the best part of perhaps being an entrepreneur. So can you give us, if you have in mind, one example of a learning loop that you've experienced? What was the most insightful mistake you made for working as the CEO of tripAbrood?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm going to answer that in a personal way. And I think one of the biggest mistakes I've made since I've started tripAbrood is believing that I'm not enough on my own. And when you kind of you found a company and you come in and you create an idea, I think the first thing you tend to ask yourself is, do I want to found this company on my own? Do I want to have co-founders around me? And you know, there's no right or wrong. Both of those routes are equally credible. But I think it depends what lens you're taking to make that decision. And I think if I'm really brutally honest with myself, I probably went into this whole entrepreneurial journey thinking, well, you know, I've worked in big corporates before. I've never started something new. Maybe I need people around me. And maybe I, on my own, am not sufficient to found this company.
Yeah.
And I think there's a layer there as sorry to pull the female card, but as a female leader, you know, less than 1% of funding, VC funding, goes to female only led companies. Mm-hmm. So, you know, invariably there were some comments early doors from some people around, you probably should get a co-founder, you know, probably support your fundraising process. Mm-hmm. And over time, I've learned that I am enough in the context of founding a company and raising money and building a business. And I'm not saying that I've got it all right. We have huge ambitions and so much more to do. We're only at the beginning. And I am only able to do this because I have an incredible team and an army of supporters around me. But I think that reflecting on the beginning of my journey at tripAbrood, I wish I'd been able to tell myself more often, you know, you've got this. If you find people to do it with, it's not because you are not enough, it's because they're right.
That's brilliantly honest. Thank you very much for that. I think it's very valuable. And I think it's a part of the culture you're building as well, with the people you're working with. So with that in mind, how do you handle disagreements within the company when you have them? What's the culture like?
Yeah, very good question. So yeah, we are entirely remote. And I mean, unsurprisingly, because that's what's happened with COVID, but we started off remote before COVID. And we're continuing to hire people all over the country and beyond, all over the world, sorry. So we've got engineers in India, and we've got people that are soon moving to California, got Scotland, UK, you know, all different time zones. And what we've had to learn to do is be really collaborative virtually. And I think one of the cultures that we certainly have is where people have an opinion and they don't agree with something, they voice it. And equally, if they're looking at a problem and they don't understand it, they ask questions. And I think for me, those are two real pillars for company culture, you know, in any situation, whether you're remote or not, is empowering your people around you to feel like it's better if you don't agree with something to say something about it, and to have a hearty argument, discussion, you know, debate. That's how we then get to the next level of kind of like, maybe we still agree that, you know, this is the right thing. Maybe we disagree to, you know, that maybe that's the right thing, and we need to go back to data and back to customers and work out what actually, you know, we can't agree on this, but maybe that's subjective. Maybe we need to go back to what customers say and what the data says. And I think that's probably the thing that I'd say really underpins how we deal with decision making, is looking at data as a form and a way of making those decisions. So what is the data telling me about what the issues are with the product? What are customers telling me are their challenges? And we would like to do a whole bunch of cool stuff, but how does that tally up with what customers actually want? And obviously the customer comes first and the customer wins every time. So I think that's enabled us to have those real debates and dialogues, and then just reflect and be like, well, you know, actually at this stage, this is my opinion. So let's go back to the data and work out what the data says.
One area of learning for me personally has been in the last year, um, being more considerate about which people I work with are predominantly right brained. I mean, I'm of course using this as an heuristic, and predominantly left brained. For the not so neuroscience savvy listeners out there, the left brain tends to be very analytical, facts, figures, rational arguments. It's the speech center, so on and so on. Whereas the right is very imaginative, sometimes intuitive. It is more creative, creates lots of associations. Usually right brain dominated people tend to have better emotional intelligence. And with that in mind, and there is of course not a consensus on this scientifically, but the idea is women tend to be more right brained versus men tend to be more left brained. Now, the reason why I'm sharing this learning for me personally is I think being able to get feedback and not seeing the feedback you receive as an attack on your personality takes emotional intelligence. And it's, I think, a particularly right brain thing. It's a skill that can be developed, but I think it's an absolutely vital skill working in an organization. And with a lot of the founders, especially in the startup world, being it's a male-dominated industry, unfortunately, I see this almost Achilles heel of many startups because I'm having a lot of conversations. They are very analytical, they are very data driven, but the emotional intelligence aspect of that usually lags behind. And as a result of that, they are usually it's a big challenge for them to build a company culture in which people honestly and openly share their opinions and give harsh feedback to each other and do not see that as a personal attack. So with that in mind, do you think that culture is there within your company?
Yeah, I mean, I will answer that probably by saying I think it's one of the biggest strengths of having a female founder in the business or someone senior in the business who's
I agree with that
a female.
wholeheartedly.
Yeah, because I do see that I, like other women, do approach a situation slightly differently. And it's not to say that we're not analytical, because I think, actually I'd probably say that, I certainly reflecting on myself, I do use both sides of my brain depending on what I'm trying to achieve. And because I'm very data driven, probably from my career so far, I tend to want to go back to what the data is saying to base on my decisions on. And I find that to be much less emotive way of making decisions and a much more powerful way of tracking the progress when you are making decisions against the data set that you're looking at. But I also reflect and think from a company culture perspective. I would say hopefully we struck a balance, and I'm not the right person to ask because I'd want my team to turn around and say, have we hit that balance? And I'm sure they'll get this recording afterwards and they'll probably say to me, yes or no.
But it's always a work in progress. Even the fact that we are talking about this, I think, is a huge sign.
Yeah, no, I think it's definitely work in progress, but it's something that's really on my mind, which is giving people the ability to express themselves, to be themselves at work, and to feel that any question is a good question. And if they don't agree with something, the worst thing you can do is stay quiet, because that doesn't help anybody.
Yeah, very big organizations, and you have worked in a few. They tend to be political sometimes. I think one of the biggest differences between working a startup versus a large organization is you're just so in such a close proximity to real feedback loops. It's quite difficult to manage relationships, and I have air quotes around the word manage, in a political and diplomatical way, and rather prove the worth of the thing you're doing through the results themselves. I think that's one of the best things, those close feedback loops working in a startup. And with that in mind, and like this is my final question, I think. So what are you hiring for any roles, and how big is the team? If you're hiring for any roles, what are they? If not now, do you plan to in the future? Because this might be especially relevant, Alexa, for people who might be interested to apply, because some of the audience we have is also looking for interesting jobs in startups. So I would love to hear about that as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think from my perspective, we are a tech-led travel startup. We're solving real customer challenges using big data sets, artificial intelligence, machine learning technology is enabling us to be able to do that. And so it's probably no surprise that I say that, the areas that we're going to be looking to increase the most is technology engineers and product managers. And as we start launching out to the UK market, we've got some super exciting partnerships that get us access to millions of customers over the next sort of couple of quarters. We've got really ambitious plans of developing and growing the product itself. We're really at the genesis of that idea of digitalizing this family travel consultant. So I'd be super keen to hear from engineers that have any experience really in AI, machine learning, data science, and UX. And when I say UX, what I'm talking about is developing user experiences that delight customers. So how do you use technology in a way that actually the end result is always benefiting a customer? And then from a product side, we definitely are going to be looking to post some roles relatively soon. So keep a watch out on our LinkedIn profile.
Alexa, what a wonderful chat this was. So for the people who have tuned in, the web page is tripabrood.com. That is tripabrood.com. Again, thank you for taking the time. I've thoroughly enjoyed this chat.
Thank you so much.